They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
Sending Poets.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas with the goal of understanding metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. My name is John, with me is Bob and Tucker, and today we're continuing with part 4 of our discussion of the book and movie Contact and the brilliance of Carl Sagan. Bob, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm awesome. Tucker, how's it going, man?
I'm happy to report that I did not have to shovel snow this weekend, so
Huzzah! Yeah,
I'm good.
yeah. Third week of snow, but the least amount, so yay. Anyway, cool. So last time we left off with right where they're about to build the machine. So, maybe we didn't actually talk too deeply about the primer and the kind of genius of how all that came together. There's these embedded within the signal, there's these like images that they realize are like blueprints basically. But they can't figure out like this, how they all go together. If they had a primer, the primer would sort of be the instructions of how to like put the blueprints together so they could actually sort of read them. And I can't quite remember how it is in the book, but in the movie, it's that scene with Haddon and Ellie, and he's sort of like, "This is your life," and saying, "I've been watching you," or kind of looked up, who you are. It's a really good scene, but it works so well because it's on a screen. He's kind of describing that he found out what the primer was. In fact, now that I'm remembering, in the book, it's classic Sagan. He's explaining it through, frequencies. I think, right? Like there's some magical kind of.
You can pull the signal into different categories. You can get it to it like an image layer, right? And then I think there was an audio layer, obviously, and it had like the movie encoded. So there's many different layers you could pull apart, I believe was the premise.
Yeah. And there was something about like, have you tried, in the book, it was very, again, just something, of course, Carl Sagan would write it this way, of something that seems very practical, kind of over my head, but I'm sure it was rooted in real things. It wasn't just sort of made up thing, but it was something about, looking at the frequency in a different range of it or something. But in the movie, it's like on a screen, and it's basically the corner of every piece of these, every page of the blueprints, the corners have these sort of symbols, but they're trying to line them up 2-dimensionally. And of course, Haddon is the genius who's like, you have to think like of Sagan, he says, and there's this animation that shows that it's like, the corners of these pages are supposed to be, linked like kind of 3-dimensionally. And so they become cubes instead of just flat pieces. Like the three pieces actually come together instead of 4 pieces based on like the corners. And it was like really, really neat. So now the primer is, revealed, and these blueprints they're looking at, they're like, what is it? We don't know. And I think Ellie in the movie is like, we think it might be some kind of transport. And everybody's like, for what? And they're like, well, we don't know yet, but it's very like intriguing, And of course, in the boardroom, there's like a scene where they're all discussing what it could be, and of course, the sort of doomsday theories come out. It's, what if it's a Trojan horse thing? Like, here, build this portal, and then we'll march our armies in and destroy destroy. And someone's like, or it's just a doomsday device. Build it and turn it on, and we just destroy ourselves. And
Both
those
reasonable,
conversations happen.
both reasonable hypotheses, honestly.
Yeah, and then it's good back and forth in the movie. I can't remember if it's in the book, but I think Ellie's kind of making the point that these aliens are so advanced, like why would they go to all this trouble just to like wipe us out? She says something about like it'd be like if humans were researching a ant colony somewhere and just went out of their way just to smash them with their boot or whatever. And I think Drumlin says like, well, and how guilty would you feel if you did smash them with your boot? So there's some good back and forth and sort of the idea, but ultimately they decide we're going to build it anyway. So I think in the movie, I don't know if it's clear where it's built, but it's by water. I just kind of assume maybe Cape Canaveral. Maybe it was mentioned and I just kind of missed it. But in the book, they build two machines. They kind of decide because it's a global consortium, all deciding this. It's not just America's got the plant, the blueprints, and the whole world is collaborating, which is neat. So they build one in Wyoming, and then the Russians are also building one in the book. And major differences here too, that in we kind of talked about this already, but in the book, it's clear that there's 5 seats. I think I skipped ahead of that. Like one of the reasons they think it's some kind of transport is because there's very clear imagery of a human-shaped, beings like kind of sitting in the inside of this capsule or pod, I guess. And again, in the book, there's 5 seats. There's 5 humans. In the movie, there's only the one. That all works really nice. Again, we've talked about that quite a bit, like why that shift in the storytelling of the movie works so well. But yeah, and a piece that I pulled out here that was in this section in the book is this word numinous that I had not heard before. Numinous, numinous. And I looked it up. There's sort of 3 meanings. One is just supernatural, mysterious. Another meaning is under the context of like holy, like filled with a sense of the presence of divinity. And then the third meaning was appealing to the higher emotions or the aesthetic sense, which, it's saying this under the category of spiritual. I really love this word. I feel like I could relate to it. When I was reading it, I was like, I think I've had moments that I would say are numinous, on the patio writing haikus and stuff. But just moments where I am kind of like struck by something like, and with you guys too, like where we were just talking about this before we started recording, when these things just sort of like emerge, through conversation, these ideas and stuff. It's a beautiful thing. So I love this word, numinous.
So I'll throw 2 cents on this numinous concept. Maybe the connection between conscious and subconscious. So when you have a moment, a numinous moment, and it might be akin to a spiritual phenomenon, like someone who feels something in a religious moment, okay, other than just the thought of the concept itself, a feeling of religiosity, some kind of awe, some kind of gratitude of experience, appreciating the moment, literally, not with pretense, just like literally just appreciating what it feels like to be alive in that moment.
Yeah.
I think that is, that's fundamental, a sharing moment, meaning you can have it by yourself, but it's a sharing moment with your emergent self that's unconscious. And you can have it with others, and it's an emergent property of the network of sharing information amongst others.
Yeah. Yeah. The sharing piece, I think, is a key ingredient there. I
Exactly,
would,
but you can share with yourself. It's kind of a, like a almost like a trick question. But I think there is a point of view to say, look, being receptive to the part of you that is, trying to show you, trying to guide you with a feeling or an idea, an image, some kind of generated signal internally, something that feels like being this kind of a thing as a guiding process, observing that, seeing that, uh, feeling it, and then describing it, labeling it, and talking about it, which is how these things come about, is my point of view.
yeah. The line in the book where this word pops up, um, I'll interested to hear what you guys think about this. I can't. I think maybe it was Ellie that said this. My bad. And like some of these book quotes, again when I highlighted them in the Kindle, like I didn't make any notes, so it's like, oh, I can't remember where this came from, but I know it's in the book. So it's so I think the bureaucratic religions try to institutionalize your perception of the numinous instead of providing the means so you can perceive the numinous directly, like looking through a 6-inch telescope. I think what that means to me is like, this is in the context, like it says, bureaucratic religions, but I think there's something to be said too about any sort of establishment, capitalism even, that sometimes it's like, um, maybe the thing that sort of gets lost because there's these other mm, priorities and other motives, like making money or or getting followers or whatever, is here I'm going to give you the numinous experience, just take my word for it, almost, versus like, here's some tools that you might be able to use to find this experience yourself, like it being like a guide versus just being like, I'm telling you that this is what it is, just take my word for it. Does that kind of resonate with you guys, what I'm trying to get to?
I
Yeah,
think that
I mean, it's weird. Okay, like, yeah, I think we're so distracted as a society that largely we've lost the numinous
Yeah.
that we should be feeling much more often. And it's like, in my personal experience, Bob, we live at the foot of America's mountain, Pikes Peak, right? And we just take it for granted.
Hmm.
But there are several times every year where, I don't know, you drive to work and the sun's hitting it just right, and
Right.
it just takes your breath away, and you have to remind yourself, like, I could be living in the middle of a prairie, but I don't. I live in this place with this gorgeous mountain that's just there all the time, and I should be more appreciative of it.
Yeah.
It's not
My
just a backdrop, you know?
Yeah. My wife has called me on that like multiple times. Like we're driving and I'm looking at my phone and she's like, "Hey, you want to like look up for a second? Like look at how awesome that is in front
but
of us."
that's
You
specific.
know?
That's specifically, I think, the barrier between the numinous moment and what we would contrast with it, which would be the non-numinous. Let's just categorize it as that. My point is, back to the 6-inch telescope. When your brain realizes you're looking at the actual light that came off of that astrological body, the actual light that traveled through space, the vacuum, the actual light that came in through our atmosphere and was collected and reflected and documented for your eye to grasp, these photons, versus seeing a picture of it.
Mhm.
So the picture of
Yeah.
the, now it might be the same exact thing, like, it might be, right? Because is it really any different to see an exact copy, a duplicate, a picture like on your phone versus the mountain itself? Is it? I think the feeling of seeing it is different. That's my point.
I,
So if
I
you,
totally agree. And I
so
would say Yeah, keep going. I want to say
I
something.
was
Yeah,
just gonna
keep
say,
going.
just to finalize, I think the most beautiful concept I can think of is the astronauts in a space station or orbiting the Earth, looking down. And we've seen the pictures. Billions of people have seen these pictures, but only a couple hundred people have felt what that feels like
To
to
see
look.
with their own eyes.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, brother. So to actually feel looking down on the entire planet as a whole underneath you, and the feeling of that moment, I can't even begin to understand it. There's no
Yeah.
possible way I think I could understand such a thing.
Yeah. It's really like asking yourself, can I really use the power of my imagination to pretend to feel how it might feel if it was actually happening? And
Correct.
it's I don't want to just say it's impossible for anybody.
Well, first you
Pretty
have to
sure
be.
for my own self, I don't think I'm that. I don't think my imagination is that powerful. But it's really fun to contemplate. But you mentioned about like, is it really different to see um, the photons like as they're captured in a picture or on your phone versus like what it actually looks like when you're looking at it with your eyes. And that's also super fascinating to me because in many ways, like I'll give you a good example. The night mode on the iPhone, like I don't know if you're aware, and I'm sure I think at this point like it's on Android phones too. But when you can like the first time I took a picture with it, it was in Florida, like at 10 p.m. We were walking on a beach and it was a full moon, and it was dark, even though the full moon was out, like it was kind of bright, but it was dark, and I took a picture, and the way it turned out, I was like, this looks like daylight. It was so bright because the mechanics of this night mode is to grab light. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it grabs light and then like renders it in a way that's like it's very fascinating to me because like it's still a capture of like what was happening with light. It's different than the way my eyeballs work, but that doesn't mean it's not a real thing that was a real moment in time. It was how this technology rendered the light and produced this final result. I think that is so fascinating to me. And so
But does
to
it
go back
block
to like,
But does looking at it feel the same as when you were there that night on the beach?
that's
Looking at
why,
it.
yeah, that's why I like what you said about it's different,
Well, because here's
yeah,
my
it's,
point. I like the idea of having a filter as an explanation for the difference in the way it feels. Meaning, you could look at a picture many different ways with many different filters or many different processing done, and
yeah,
obviously,
that comic filter, yeah,
sure, exactly, yeah, all these different things you could do, but and meaning it wouldn't feel the same because your output is going to be a filtered output, but go back to the space station. I'm more interested in the connection between how it felt like the sand between your toes and the water on your ankles. In that, in the space station, you're literally weightless. So you're looking at through a portal, weightless. You've never seen any picture in your life weightless. You don't even know the context of what it means to live weightless, to have right. You don't even know what it feels like to have that
yeah,
experience, let alone to couple that experience with visualizing the entire planet down below you. So I'm getting to the point of I'll never know what it felt like, the smell of the air in Florida the night you took that picture. No matter how many filters you put on it, no matter what you do with that picture,
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
never get that experience, or to hold your wife's hand, or the shade of the moon, how it made a shadow on the sand, or whatever. Right? All these things are unique to the moment of being in that place and time.
yeah. It's
That's the new.
interesting to me too
Sorry,
is,
just triggering that numinous thing. I think that's
yeah,
what it is,
yeah,
the awe.
yeah. It's interesting to me too is that I won't know what it's like to not also have that feeling. Like I have the picture, um, but I was also there, and I can't separate that. It's like when you do something for the first time, and you can't go back and do it for the first time in a different state of mind or whatever. It happened, that one experience is all you have. I think that's really interesting. to think about also.
Contextualized learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The bond between the information and the experience in which the information was learned.
Right. Wow.
And I think in some ways, going back to the telescope, I have like a decent little 4-inch telescope, and I really have not spent much time with it. That's kind of a goal for this summer. But a couple of years ago, there was a lunar eclipse, and I set it up to look at that, and you could actually zoom in enough with that telescope that the edge of the moon was no longer round. You could start to see, jagged lines from all the little mountains and craters and stuff. It took that
Wow.
smooth,
That's cool.
round edge away. And you don't get that from a picture, I don't think. You have to. I'm sure there's a picture out there that is similar, but it's like you had to go find that for yourself, and it kind of changes you a little bit. Changes the way you think about the moon. It's not just this big round thing up in the sky. It's actually much more detailed than we notice on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a huge fundamental point. It reminds me of the question, how long is the coastline of Great Britain or whatever? And the answer is, it depends on how long your ruler is, right?
Yeah.
And so as you get a finer and finer view of your target, the moon in this case, you're going to see different properties emerge that were not obvious or even impossible to see prior. So that is one of those beautiful things, I think, of looking deeper, looking closer. It's like the poet's eye or the artist's eye or something like that. Da Vinci, right? He could just see the object in its truth, and not in a abstraction of a universal concept of, let's just say, an apple or something. He didn't see like a universal apple. He saw that apple, specifically how that thing looks, specifically on that day, that time. And so part of being in the moment, I guess you could say.
Yeah. The experience, I think that's what one of the things it all boils down to is like the importance of like having that experience for yourself. And this is a nice tie back into the movie. So like, there's this scene where all these people have come out, it's almost like Woodstock or something. They just come out to be around the machine and just be there, have the experience of seeing it versus just sitting at home watching it on the news or whatever, right? Just and it's a beautiful scene. Ellie is like driving through these crowds, and it's like to me the point was to show the segments of groups, right? There were like people that were like hail vegans, like they're all in, like let's do it, like come and get us, whatever, like we're all for the aliens, like we come in peace. There's to the other side of this spectrum or whatever, where it's Jake Busey, son of Gary Busey. He's like the sort of religious cult kind of leader guy, and he's just spouting all kinds of doomsday stuff. This is going to be the end of our species, like all the scientists think they know what they're doing, but they really don't. And this is the worst thing that's ever going to happen to us. And there's a really good shot where he ends up staring at her. Ellie's in a car driving through these crowds, and the window is down. It's a really nice shot. Like he kind of stops talking and he looks at her. He's kind of even pointing at her, I think. And they're just staring at each other. And then she rolls the window up and you can see his reflection, in the window. It's a really good shot. Good filmmaking there, I think. But that's,
foreshadowing as well to
yeah,
her ability to recognize he's not the right guy at the right place and try to alert. It doesn't save anybody, but she tries to alert.
Right.
Because she's watching the cameras, the security camera.
Yeah, so that's so that kind of moving it along, the whole, at this point it's like a test of the machine. It's not the actual, I think at this point, like David Drumlin was picked to be the guy to go, but they're just going to do this test first. And in the book I think it's a bit different. They're still going to do a test, but the what ends up happening is this Jake Busey character ends up sneaking in looking like some kind of technician with a bomb strapped to his chest. And, Ellie does notice him, says like, that guy's not supposed to be here, tries to stop, too late. He detonates the bomb, the machine explodes. In the book, it's similar, but I don't think there's like a religious kind of character. I think it's just people, terrorists or sabotage is sort of how it's kind of.
I don't think they
explained.
ever really address who was behind it in the book. I think it was kind of just left as somebody
who didn't want
sabotaged it, and
Yeah.
we don't know at what point in the process that happened.
Yeah. And so, it is interesting. I think we hinted at this in the last episode, but in both the book and the movie, R.I.P. David Drumlin, he dies in the explosion. And in the movie, if you didn't know what was going to happen, it's very like, well, I guess that's it. That sucks. She goes back to like her apartment and she walks in and there's all this like tech set up. Looks like some weird like small weird satellite dish, a big monitor, like a little kind of laptop thing. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically, like knock knock, like hello Ellie or whatever. And it ends up being the Haddon character broadcasting from Mir. This is sort of the payoff when he's like, I'll leave this world soon enough. I'll grant these people that want him to kind of disappear or whatever. He's like, I'll grant them their wish soon enough. He's on the Mir space station. And I love it so much, the way it's kind of, he kind of shows her, he's like, check this out. It's like Google Earth before Google Earth. It's like zooming in on Japan. He's like, look a little closer. She's like, I recognize, whatever, it's a Hokkaido maybe or something. He's like, look closer. And it's like zooming in and boom, there's a second machine there. That again, because he kind of worked his, magic or whatever, and had his fingers in the right pies, I suppose, to be involved in the building of this machine, that he could have a second one built kind of in secret, away from the press, away from like anybody that could possibly sabotage it, right? And I love the line he says.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say real quick, he says, so it's this like, oh, great, it's not over, right? There's another machine. And he goes, they still want an American to go, doctor. Want to take a ride? I love it so much.
That's
Anyway,
a great scene,
Yeah.
great actors. I was just going to mention, in the book, there was a lot of tension behind who is going to fill nationally, who is going to be the nations representing the 5 seats. And Japan opted to be the contractor.
Yeah.
And so their big payoff was they got to build 2, right, or whatever. I think they got to be.
Exactly. They mentioned that in the movie too, like in exchange for sending a candidate for the movie is one final candidate, but Japan didn't even put anyone into the running for it in exchange for having like the contract rights or whatever to be able to do the building. Yeah, so same kind of thing. It kind of worked out that way. And then so let's talk about the machine itself though, because it's like this massive sort of I don't know, like thing.
It's almost like a gyroscope on a stand.
Yes, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Gyroscope of these concentric like rings that are either just spinning or rotating in a way. It's very, very cool looking. I think it was basically described that way in the book, and of course, Sagan explains what kind of material. I can't remember now, but
I think the term is like you guys might remember multi-axis trainers. I don't know if you remember. So it's running like, now I don't think it's randomly pulling it like the multi-axis trainer, but that's what the concept was, is these rings that are swinging in these multiple axes, right, that are accelerating, and some kind of there was some kind of a process going on that, according to the blueprints, right, there was some kind of like weird stuff happened. I'm trying to remember what it was. Was it like a living thing, or what was it that they?
Well, the living part was that the biological part that they had to grow, and they never really knew. It never really touched on what it did. But I think we talked about it before, where I kind of have my own perspective that was what actually like read the people in the capsule. That biological part was what
Yeah.
somehow interacted with the people that allowed it to pull Ellie's dad out of her head. But to me,
Yeah.
it almost seemed like, the mechanics of the machine. What made it believable is you kind of go, okay, you've got all these spinning rings, and within the spinning ring, you've got these other pieces that are spinning on the same ring of the axis, or the same axis of the ring, and like it could theoretically, or plausibly create enough magnetic force to create a wormhole or something like that. I mean, I think
Right.
they did a good job of making it something that hasn't happened plausible. It wasn't just like magic. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Right. It seemed a little more believable than just magic. And the way it is the design is that there's the pod that either the 1 or 5 people are in is sort of suspended above the spinning rings, and at the right moment the pod would drop through the rings, and then nobody knows, right? And then the maybe it's a wormhole, maybe then they get you know transported 26 light years away, and if they come back, at least 52 years will have gone by. Like, nobody knows. It's a very just like, we'll just find out. It's pretty cool. I do love the imagery in the movie, as Ellie is walking to the pod, on this gantry, is that the word, this walkway that's kind of holding the pod, and she's kind of looking over and seeing these huge massive rings, and again, some of them are kind of spinning fast, some of them are just like really slowly kind of going, and the sound and everything, it's done really well. I feel like it's a scene I could just be like, okay, rewind, watch again,
Oh,
rewind, watch again.
100%.
It's like so good.
I also like the structure of the transport craft itself, meaning it's a dodecahedron, right?
Mhm.
It's a platonic shape, and it's very evocative for me of like some alien technology. It's just I loved the concept. I can't remember if there was that concept in the book or not, but in the movie, the craft itself was so cool. I loved. Was it a dodecahedron in the book? Maybe it was. I can't remember.
I can't remember either, but there was something for sure in the book about like 5 individuals, and were there seats in the pod in the book? Were there actual like 5 seats? Because there's a point in the movie that they make about, there's all these safety um features that weren't part of the blueprints. Like Ellie says, like, I want to say again, like, this wasn't part of the design. Like, are we sure?
Yeah, there was seats, because I think that was part of it. She was making the argument, if this was a doomsday device, why would they have put a chair in there? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
that, it
Well,
just doesn't make sense.
but I think in the movie, it was like John says, in that there was no seat, and she was proved correct that they should not have added the seat. And because she unbuckled herself, actually to chase after the little Christopher medallion, right, the little master Saint
Yeah.
Christopher thing, that's
Uh,
kind of saved her
yeah.
life in a way,
It was a
right?
little,
Because
yeah. Was it the Saint? I think it was.
it
It
was.
was. It was the little compass from the Cracker
That's,
Jack
I
box.
apologize. The
That,
compass. Yes, that's what I meant.
yeah,
It's the compass. Thank you.
yeah. That Palmer Joss gave her when they first met. He's like,
That
yeah. He gives
that's
her.
that's right. Sorry.
Yeah.
And
It's a neat little thing.
but that thing where she was proven correct, whereas in the book, I think the chairs never were a safety issue because they were there all along, like Tucker
All
said
along.
in
Yeah.
the plans itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, because
interesting
the
piece
book,
in the.
well, the book goes into like more detail, like while they're building the machine, where it's like they even took precautions, like we're not going to test any individual components unless it specifically says in the instructions to test it in a certain way, because we don't know if on some micro level, like just us testing a component somehow changes it.
You would have to trust them completely. You would have to
right.
trust the maker of the plan because you don't know what you're building. Imagine how weird that is. It's never happened before, as far as I know, where you have a detailed set of instructions that you have to follow out and you don't even know what you're doing. You don't even know what it's for. Not really. Like, that's such a weird, interesting concept.
Yeah.
I don't know why it sent my mind this direction when you said that, but it's like, can you imagine the people who were building the first atom bomb?
Oh yeah.
They knew what they were building. Well, at least the higher level ones did. But you got to stand next to that thing and put it together.
Interesting.
And it's
Yeah.
never been done. Like, you don't know what's the one mistake we can make that blows this thing up in my face. It's never been done.
And people
Right.
had died from radiation accidents, right? Some critical accidents that had happened. So they knew the danger of radiation, but never having the ability to harness the power of fission itself to, to unleash a atom bomb. But that's a great point, though. The first time, meaning you're doing something you don't exactly know all the outcomes, perceived outcomes. I think that's a very powerful metaphor of humans progressing without being able to foresee, like, the power to make progress, but not the wisdom to foresee all outcomes.
Yeah, I like that. I said that.
Yeah.
To dig in a little bit more on the atom bomb thing, as soon as you said that, of course, I'm thinking about Oppenheimer, the Christopher Nolan movie, so good. But there is that scene where I think it's illustrating that exact point you're making, Tucker. It's a movie, right? It's not a documentary, so I don't know how realistic it is. But the scene itself is, it's like the last piece of the bomb that they're putting in. But it made me think, because, like, if I remember right, the whole point or the whole trigger, I guess, of making it work was smashing, something that would smash something into something else. And there had to be this mechanism to, like a firing kind of mechanism. And I guess that's the last piece that they're putting in there. But it's weird because the way that the bomb looks in the movie, it's like, I think there's like many firing mechanisms. There's all kinds of electronics like on the outside. I think all of those are like, it's like many things are there's something on the outside, on sort of like the edge, I guess, the inside edge of the bomb, and the firing mechanisms, I think, right, are all at the same time, like forcing something towards the center where the refined plutonium or uranium, was it uranium that they used in the Trinity test? Anyway, like, so it was an interesting scene. I know we're not talking about that movie, but I'm talking about it anyway. Where there's like this tension, like you said, nobody's done this before, but it's specifically on this last piece that they're putting in. And I wonder if that, I don't know, maybe I just don't understand it fully.
I mean, in simple terms, they use a radioactive core, uranium, plutonium, and they surround it with explosives. And all those explosives detonate at the same time and compress that core enough that a chain reaction starts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's basically you create a bomb to make the bigger bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they, man, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have gone down the side carrot, as we sometimes call them, like into Oppenheimer. Like, maybe we should wrangle back into Contact. That's mentioned when the one guy's like, we should make a hydrogen bomb, and they're like, well, how would you do it? He's like, you need a small atom bomb first. Like, well, then we got to make the atom bomb anyway, so let's just keep making the atom bomb. Anyway, yeah, fusion reaction versus fission reaction, or which one ever happened first, I forget. But yeah, really interesting stuff. So okay, so to tie it back to Contact, yeah, they're building this thing, but they don't know what's going to happen. They just have this like huge amount of trust in,
by the way, John, I think
signal that came from the space, right?
I think that is kind of what Sagan is talking about, meaning in the book itself, there's a lot of geopolitics that goes on with the process, right? The process of what do we do with this signal? Because these machines are not cheap. Like, this is not
Yeah.
But right, these things are $1 trillion machines, and multiple nations are coming together, and they're horse trading, like who's building what and where's it going to be and who's going to be the pilot or who's going to do this. And so there's a bunch of interesting geopolitics going on directly related to, in my opinion, the concept of the atom bomb and nuclear proliferation and the shared danger of all nations on Earth. Like once we got to the level of we can destroy this planet, it's the same conversation in theory as what do you do with this signal from space?
Yeah.
And so the way Sagan is resolving this, meaning resolving this technological gap or cultural gap from a prehistory hunter-gatherer lifestyle to nation states, and now maybe perhaps post-nation state, global state, like a unification, not through threats like destruction through atomic weapons or hydrogen bombs, but through opportunity. Like here's a signal from a super intelligence. This could be the path to unlimited, gravy train for everybody on this planet. How could you turn it down? So I think this is the great metaphor of Sagan, is pitching this question, this opportunistic threat or opportunity question of all humanity as a singular planet-wide species and not nation states that have no meaningful differences. Like the stage in his geopolitics and history that we've triumphed is past natural resources and who lives next to which river and the rest. I mean, we're at these existential level, global level concepts that probably require new solutions. And I think that's what Sagan is expressing in this art.
Yeah. It occurred to me, here's a question I'll try to formulate intelligently. But does it seem like, of course he was going to write it this way, like that it ends up the way it does, like as opposed to, I mean, can you imagine just for a second, like what if it did end up like just total apocalyptic, like doomsday, the alien race comes and invades, and I mean, it just seems like that's just not what Carl Sagan would have done, right? I mean, maybe he could have. He's a genius. He could do anything. He could write anything, but that wasn't his speed, right? Like, I think that's what you're saying, Bob, right? Like,
what I'm saying is, okay, so back to the nuclear weapon question. They didn't know before it was tested what would happen next. There were options or probabilities that it would be a chain reaction event that would set the atmosphere on fire or whatever, right? Some doomsday, what if was a possibility. No one could say it's not, because you can't prove that without having ever done it the first time anyway.
Theory only takes you so far.
Theory only takes you so far. So I think there's this moment of truth where you do have to push your chips in and make a prediction, what's going to happen next. And so the concept of Sagan, back to this, this book reflecting the reality of the Manhattan Project. Let's just go there. I think that was a great idea, Tucker. And to have it be analogous to this concept of a huge technological feat. Like there was the best and brightest and the most money and everything. Everybody was pushing behind a singular goal, and they made it work without ever having done it before. I mean, just a fantastic feat of theory and engineering and all the rest. And many players in the puzzle who had no idea what part they were playing and all the rest. So I think it's directly analogous to making this machine. And what's so curious is the decision to go or no go, meaning the decision to do the project or not. It's such a powerful thing. I think Sagan spent a lot of time in the book that was just not feasible to cover in the movie, but a lot of time in the book about how do you make these decisions. And they had to did they not have to form a global body essentially to process the project? Like, I think that was the key moment in my mind, was you either have a global threat. So let's think back to another movie. What's the one with the asteroid coming in? It's got Bruce Willis and
Armageddon.
Thank you, Armageddon. So you have to unite, and there's a bunch of feel-good moments through this, process. Unite a bunch of people and nations and what have you because of a common threat. There's this one thing that's happening, right? We're all going to die. It doesn't matter what our differences are. We have to pull together now. And then Sagan's concept is there's this one opportunity that we'll never get again. Intelligence, super intelligence, extending a hand in friendship, let's just say, an opportunity to learn and be lifted out from the lower levels to the upper levels of the universe, whatever that could mean, unlimited opportunity. And that's what they were going for. And I think that's the genius, uniting not through fear of a threat, but through desire of opportunity universally.
I think that's why I love it so much, because it just like, had he went a different route and it was an alien invasion or something, I'm sure I still would enjoy it. But what you're describing to me is like just so the Venn diagram between what you're describing and just being like optimistic. Do you know what I mean? There's such a big intersection there, and I think I live in that intersection, most of the time.
I agree, but I like the counterpoint or counterfactual of what if the armies of your enemy come pouring out the gate. I mean, it's a really good question. It really is, and I don't know what the answer is, but that is the question. Because what happens back to the nuclear proliferation? Let's say you win the battle by having an A-bomb, but you lose the war in that everybody dies 300 years from that moment because somebody pushes the button and et cetera, right? So how do you reconcile that? How do you resolve that? Right?
Yeah. Fun stuff to contemplate.
Well, no, I think it's very real. Very real.
Yeah.
I found it interesting in the book too. It doesn't really get into it in the movie, but in the book, just the building of the machine has all these, technological and economic consequences outside of just the machine. And there's a part where they talk about, much like Haddon, a lot of the elite are leaving in droves and living in space because of the health benefits and whatnot. And there was a quote in the book that basically said, the owners of the planet were picking up in droves and leaving. They couldn't do nearly as much damage up there, it was argued, as down here. And I actually made a note of this, and I did do the homework.
Oh, nice.
Because I was like, is that really... How would that actually affect things? And I did the math. One SpaceX launch has the same emissions as 1,100 hours of Learjet usage.
Wow! Oh my God!
So it's like, yeah, no, they're probably doing more damage by launching all themselves into orbit in mass, because that's just... While these rocket launches are cool, they are not very environmentally friendly at all.
Yeah, good point. So you just got to find like a better propulsion system, right? More environmentally friendly. Space elevator. Yeah.
The space elevator. And that is that is a cool idea, but I've read several sci-fi books that kind of detailed what would happen should that cable let go, and that's not a good time. That creates an issue pretty quickly.
I think somebody mentioned Isaac Asimov at one point. Maybe I'm thinking of a dream I had. Anyway, I think Isaac Asimov wrote Foundation, which Apple making a series out of. And in the first season, I think there's a space elevator that, gets sabotaged. And
I think that is where it came from. I read that not too long ago.
Yeah.
I remember one from Arthur C. Clarke. I can't remember what it was called, but it had a space elevator. But I think the product or the material it was made out of was some special material. It never broke, I don't think, in the book.
Yeah.
It was like some special material. If you touched it, it would cut right through your hand or whatever.
Another one, Old Man's War. John Scalzi is the author. It's a space elevator, and in that one, it's awesome. It works. Nobody sabotages it or anything. But maybe in our lifetime, someone will really try to make that happen. I mean there's still got to be. You still have to like have something. How would that work? Right? Would it be pulling it up like from space, or would it be like pushing from the Earth? Like how did that?
You would launch something into orbit and then lower the cable from that thing and attach it to the ground, and then you would have tension on it, and you could build from that first launch, essentially a ring or something around that would be stabilized, and like, so you'd have to start with the geosynchronous orbit of the thing that's dropping your
Right.
cable, and it'd have to unspool this cable and catch it on the ground and lock it in place. And then it's just it's the tension force. So it's about the material, and I don't think there's any material that we have on Earth today that would be able to sustain that friction between going from space and dropping down through the atmosphere. And I just don't think that.
Just think about the thermal characteristics of a material that would have to do that. I mean, it would have to account for being basically completely frozen on the space side to 100 degrees on the planet, and you have to be able to account for the expansion and contraction of that material at all those different layers. I don't know that it's feasible as a cable type system. Like, I wonder, acoustic levitation maybe. They can levitate these small balls with just sound. Can you scale that up enough to move something into space maybe?
Mm.
Well, I was thinking of there are, I think, currently gliders that are receptive to like microwave energy, and you could like shoot microwaves at them, and they can power themselves with stuff, some kind of directed energy concept. I mean, lasers, there's talk about all kinds of things to propel like a space sail or something like that. I mean, there's many different ways to get away from a chemical based engine.
Propulsion.
I think propulsion. I think it's problematic inside the atmosphere of the planet to find something that makes sense, that's more efficient or cost effective than a chemical propulsion system just to leave Earth.
Yeah, so, I got it. Go ahead.
Go for it. No, what you got?
Teleportation, you guys.
Okay, yeah.
Beam me up, Scotty.
You first, John. You first.
Yeah. Are you still you on the other end?
Exactly. I'm not going to be the guinea pig there. That's going to be one of those, like back to the who stands next to the bomb as they're building it the first time. I'm not going to be the first one that gets beamed. Go back to Spaceballs, right? Like what happens?
Yeah. Why did anybody tell me my ass was so big?
Exactly.
Oh man, you think the ethics behind the machine in that book are contentious. Yeah, the whole wait till you get religion involved in teleportation, and it's like, well, did you teleport the soul or just the body?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's always the concept of, are you disassembling and transmitting and then reassembling, or is it just the information? They're just making a copy, right?
Yeah. We destroyed the original and created a clone.
Correct. Yeah. But so I don't know. I don't think, but the clone would think that they're the original, right? The clone would never know.
Yeah.
And technically you wouldn't either. Because if you weren't the same you on the other end, then the real you is gone.
That's what I'm saying.
Either.
The person who enters is dead. And then the person who comes out is new, but they think they're the old person.
Yeah. Altered, there's a series, I think it's based on a graphic novel or a comic perhaps, called Altered Carbon, and it's that idea you can kind of put you can digitize yourself, and then wear sleeves is, I think the terminology they have is like, it's just a human body that's just a sleeve, and you kind of put your consciousness into it, which, to be fair, doesn't that seem maybe a little more realistic than truly just like Star Trek beaming? Like, let's just say Ray Kurzweil does figure out how to put his consciousness into a digital form. Well, you can beam digital information around. So if it's just like you said, like what if the space station just has all these like shells of physical bodies, and instead of having
continuity of consciousness, right?
Yeah. It almost seems like that would be more feasible than actual dismantling of yourself at the atomic level, right? And rebuilding yourself. Like, that does seem so far in the future, sci-fi. Like, it'll be it'll be putting your consciousness into like a digital form and beaming it, and then just loading yourself into like a new physical body. I think before anybody figures out how to actually teleport. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but you know, those seems like the more realistic options. Or either we keep using propulsion to escape the atmosphere, or we're doing something to sort of beam ourselves away.
I think realistically the concept would be you could have a gestational level human embryo frozen, and a whole bunch of them, and send those, and then grow yourself a population on the other side or something. I mean, that seems, within technologically capable, we could do that, at however slow you would travel. So that's the problem, is the universe is so vast. You could go to like maybe Europa or something like that, but you're not leaving the solar system like that
until the technology of like cryo freezing and suspended animation.
I'm even saying
comes in.
Like teleportation kind of stuff, like speed of light, like to get to Andromeda or something, I think is probably like 4 light years, something like that. So as far as real propulsion, how long it would take you to get to the Andromeda galaxy would be, I don't know. I mean, it would be ridiculous, right? It would be.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time you got there would be, well, anyway.
Civilization on Earth would probably be gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's such a one-way trip. Anyway, I think the technological advances are going to be problematic, in that everything that has happened in the book is sci-fi to the level of wormholes and stuff like that. So obviously there is a problem with relying on something like this to be our saving grace, as our unifying. Like, I don't think we can count on this, obviously, as going to be the thing that unifies the planet. We'll get a signal from space someday, and that's going to bring us all together. But I think that's the take-home message, is we have to find some shared opportunity that makes more sense for everybody to selfishly want to pursue for opportunity's sake, because that makes it realistic. Like any concept of like humans are going to change their nature and reverse evolutionary history, and not try to maximize their own rational self-interest. I just don't see that happening. So go back to what Tucker was saying about amount of pollution in the atmosphere or whatever. I mean, I just don't think that's going to be a consideration for an individual. I just don't know how someone could conceptualize. It's almost like, I know there are starving children in Africa or Asia or any place, in America even, right? There's starving children. I know it would only take a small amount of my assets to save at least one child. If a child was sitting in front of me and I knew I could, $200, I could save this child's life by buying them some, of course I would do it. Of course. There's no child I would ever let die because I wouldn't open my wallet for $50 or a couple $100, but I don't do it. I never do it. Why don't I ever do it? Because they're thousands of miles away, or they're not in front of me. I mean, there's a natural thing of humanity. So to have an individual say, look, I'm going to forego my hopes, dreams, ambitions, needs, wants, desires for the sake of someone else's kids in 500 years from now or whatever. I mean, it's so abstract. I don't think humans can possibly do this at a population level.
Abstract is the key word there, because it goes back to the experience thing. Like you said, if you had the actual experience of this starving, family or kid or whatever, like right in front of you, it's totally different than just totally like, well, I saw it on TV, totally or I saw like in an email or totally an advertisement, as I'm scrolling on my phone or whatever. Like,
it's the real photons.
The real photons coming into you, being absorbed in your eyeballs and stuff.
The numinous. It's the numinous level of the
yeah. So one other thing I was going to mention back to the movie I thought was interesting is the light. I think we talked about this briefly before also, but as they're prepping Ellie to get in this machine, they're like, we've been giving, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but something like it was a suicide pill, basically. Like, we've been giving these to people since the Cold War or something, or, something. And, she's like, I'm gonna like travel across the galaxy just to kill myself. And they're like, well, maybe you get stranded, maybe this happens, maybe that happens. And it's interesting the way they say it. The guy's like, there's thousands of reasons we can think of why you might need this, but it's the ones we can't think of that really make it important that you should have it or whatever. So I thought that was interesting. And of course, it reminded me of Project Hail Mary. I know all three of us have read that. A similar type of thing, one-way trip. You're probably not coming back. No. Well, I think they did say like, yeah, you're definitely not coming back or whatever. And so but they give them the option. They're like, basically, how would you want to die when the time comes that you're just gonna starve to death or suffocate, or you could just take yourself out. And there's this one character that's like, heroin. I want heroin. She's like, I've been a good girl my whole life. I've never like broken the law. I've always like done everything, but she's like, I want to go out. I want to know what it's like. I want to go out there. She's like, I want 3 doses. I want like one to know what it's like, one to like, have like an intentional, kind of experience with it, and one to just like do myself in. Pretty interesting concept there.
Well, I think it goes back to what we're talking about, which is the unknowable, downstream consequences of these activities. Like it's a very intentional plot device to show that there are some, because here's the thing, like we know how the story ends, and you don't know until you've watched it at least the first time, but you kind of assume stories end a certain kind of way, right? If you're an adult in this world, most
Again,
stories,
if it's a Sagan thing, it's probably not going to be an alien invasion and tragic,
correct,
right?
correct. So it does build in like this little hint of, we can't always control everything. We can't always predict everything. We can't always see everything before it comes. And it's a real, it's a real mental game you have to play. You have to do the what if, the game theory of like, what if I am stranded, I can't come back or whatever. Am I going to starve to death? Like that's terrible. So I think there is a very important plot device to be had through the concept of I'm risking something really big here. You have to be aware, and you have to take, you have to take it seriously.
Yeah. Agreed. So this ramp up into the actual like machine being activated and going, it's done really well. I remember there was one of the particular rings that it's stationary the whole time until like, I don't know, the last 30 seconds or something. And the way that it starts moving is there's 2 little rockets attached to it. And the rockets just like go off. And I remember the first time I was kind of like, what are those for? But I was like, oh, I get it. It's just to get the momentum going. It's like, that's how that final ring starts moving, is by these little rockets. Like, they just go off, and then they, they detach from the rings, but that gets the momentum of that final ring kind of moving. Thought that was really neat. And then, I think it's done really well. Like the music, the tension is like building up as they're doing the countdown. There's like vibrations happening. Some of the transmissions from the cameras that they've got inside the pod, which again aren't part of the design, but they're maybe like staticky, and it's kind of intense. And there's this payoff for the character Kent, the blind character, where he's kind of described as having like better hearing than everyone else, and he can hear Ellie saying like, okay to go, I'm okay to go. It's like, and everything's vibrating, and it's very intense. 3 2, like it's great too. I remember like she's kind of looking at the inside of the pod that she's in, and it starts kind of being translucent. She's trying to describe it, and I remember thinking like, she's never had an acid trip before. Like, she doesn't know what words to use, but that's what's happening. Like, she's hallucinating. She's like, I can't. She's like, it's kind of like she's like, I don't know what the words. And again, this ties into what she says in a bit, but anyway, so it's really cool. And the countdown's happening. 3 2 1. The pod gets dropped. Do you remember the first thing she says? when the pod drops and it goes in, she says, "Oh God." And I thought
I
that was
don't
so
remember that.
intentional. I thought it was so intentional because there's this theme of, science and faith and God, and like, she's made a point that like she doesn't necessarily believe in God because she would need proof. And the first thing she says and the imagery inside the thing is like, it's like a roller coaster. It's like, from outside this pod just drops, but inside she's like going into this wormhole. And that's the first thing she says is, "Oh God." I just thought it was like a beautiful, beautiful writing,
It's the whole, there's no atheist in a foxhole debate,
Yep.
which I don't believe. I don't believe that's accurate. I think the human creature as a whole, whether it's God or something else, has the ability to put faith that something's going to be all right, even despite all the evidence in front of them. Now, whether that's faith based on a higher power or just optimism, I think that's a very human property. I
human.
think
Yeah.
I'm not sure that exists in the animal kingdom. I think it's our ability to think and to imagine a scenario working out in our benefit when everything is telling you you're about to die is a very
Yeah.
human feature.
Yeah.
I
A
think
lot, a
it's
lot to
just,
go in there.
just
Yeah.
a little maybe separate facet, not to say anything about that point of view, but just a little bit offset from in the foxhole metaphor. Maybe it's not that God is going to grant them their prayer answered. Maybe it's that there's no words to describe how it feels to really be in a foxhole. Okay, when the shells are coming down upon you and there's just death is raining down and it's just in the wormhole. There's no words. We're gonna get to this real quick about
Yeah.
how
Yeah, we
powerful
are.
this is, but I think it alludes to specifically, like you're talking about, John, using these words, "Oh God," alludes to this moment of loss. There's no comparison.
Yeah.
There is no it's not like anything, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and so you get stuck into this "oh God" moment. Like, what else do you say? What do you do?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of in addition to not being able, maybe the intellectualizing moment of thinking your way through it, but there's just like, you got no words, you got nothing.
I wonder if it has something to do with just like, I think we've talked about this briefly in the past as well. Like Tucker, I think you may have even said like, I don't know, genetic memory or things that are passed through. What I'm getting at is like, um, I find myself like sometimes in like scary movies or things that are like shocking or just whatever. I'll say Jesus, but I'm not really a Jesus person, I would say. I've never gone to church. I just wasn't raised that way. I don't really have a relationship with Jesus, but I say Jesus automatically in many times where it's just like as automatic as like holy shit. I might just be like Jesus Christ. It's like, where does that come from? Like, is it just because I've heard people say it my whole life? Is there something like in my
Holy
like deep
cow!
in
You ever heard of holy cow?
yeah, right. Is there something like though like deep embedded in my ancestry or something? Because my you know great grandparents, I mean, well, my grandparents were Catholic. My dad went to Catholic school, so there is like Catholicism in my heritage, I guess, if I could say it that way. But I don't have it's all abstract, right? I don't have a direct experience of that myself. So I've wondered about that. It could not be anything deep at all. It could be just because, well, people have said Jesus around me like my whole life, in exclamation fashion, like Jesus. Um,
I think
you
it's just
know,
cultural.
Yeah,
cultural. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I mean the truth is, living in America, even if you're not religious, it's so prevalent that there's no way to not have that influence your culture. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and
Yeah.
you would have to basically live in a cave to not have some sort of religious cultural reference point of view. I think pretty much in any country. But
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, and isn't that fascinating to think about the other countries where maybe Jesus isn't, is so abstract for them, but it's, somebody else. It's some other god or some other deity, and why is that interesting to me? Because at the root of it, the actual feelings that all the people are having around that are probably much more similar than we think, right? Just because the words are different doesn't mean the feeling necessarily is different.
The shared human experience. It's
Mhm.
exclamatory. It's like
Yeah.
like a question. We all have questions in our cultures, and everybody has, and some. Everybody has nouns. Everybody has verbs, right? I mean, I think these
Mhm.
are concepts that are embedded with, like we were talking about before, Joseph Campbell. The archetype of the human experience itself across boundaries of culture and time.
Mhm.
I had a crazy kind of experience in Italy. We went to Volterra, which is this hilltop fortress city in the middle of the Tuscan countryside, and it's absolutely stunning. But you go down to like where the main gate is, and there's just this little sign, and it's like maybe a paragraph, and it's talking about how, when that gate was first built and when it was added to, and then when the walls were, but they bring up like the first stones for that gate were set in like the 3rd century BC. And I
Wow.
just had this weird, like, because Italy is so Catholic and like the churches are so big and so like it's just such their culture. But I'm like, and yet here's this gate that was built 3 centuries before Christ was even supposed to have been born, right? And
Mhm.
it gets like 3 lines in a paragraph, and that's
Mhm.
it. That's it. And I'm like, what's the story of those people?
Yeah,
Like
right.
why are we, like everything in Italy is just all this religious art, and it's like, but what about those people? Like, why is nobody telling their story? Like, why is it less important because it doesn't have this religious tie? Like, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, those are still your ancestors. Like, they deserve a spot in that story too.
Yeah. Wow. Good perspective. Yeah. Stonehenge, same kind of thing, like what the detail of like all that. I mean, there's a museum outside Stonehenge, and I didn't read all the stuff. Shame on me. It's there, but like the thing that most people, I don't know if I can say most people, but it seems like most people associate Stonehenge with aliens. And you know, how did that happen? Like it doesn't, there's nothing in the museum there. Even though I didn't read all this stuff, there was no mention of aliens. So
Yeah,
kind of,
it's the same thing with the pyramids. It's like, yeah, you have all these people. Well, we don't have the technology to build that today. It's like, yeah, we do. Nobody wants to allocate the budget. We could easily build the pyramids again. Who's going to pay for it and why?
yeah. Look
That's
at
the
the
whole thing.
amazing, like the Burj Khalifa, right? Like the tallest building in the world. Like think about that. Like amazing feats of engineering and construction. Like the the pyramids, yeah, also amazing, but like of course we could do stuff like that. Like yeah, totally agree with you there.
I read an article just recently that there's somewhere down in Peru where on this hilltop ridge there was all these towers, and they never really like knew what they were for. They just kind of assumed it was defense or whatever. But as part of like this latest excavation, somebody like put out the question like, this doesn't really make sense as like a defensive fortification. Like, we need to look at what it actually is. And what they found is it's a calendar. And there's a very specific spot, you know, a good distance away, where if you stand in this specific spot, the sun rises between each of those towers at very specific times during the year. And so they basically figured out that, you know, they built these towers so this shaman could go out there and stand in this spot and be able to predict, you know, when to plant crops, when to harvest them, when and so it's crazy that like us as humans create these huge stories behind these ancient structures and give them these mythical, you know, it was built by aliens or it was built by druids. And a lot of times there is a simpler explanation, you know, it's just,
Yeah.
you got to stand back from what you want it to be and look at
Yeah,
what
exactly.
it actually is.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, it's the whole thing with the pyramids being aligned the same way as the three belt stars of Orion. Well, it's like, yeah, it's a really kind of visible constellation. It's one of the first ones you can see just walking out the door at night during the winter months. It's just right there. It's like, well, it doesn't. Maybe they just like that constellation and they just built them in that area. Doesn't mean that they were worshiping the aliens that came from there. They just thought it was cool.
Yeah. So speaking about aliens, back to the signal and the machine. So she's in this wormhole, and there's like 3 stops, I believe, like 3, you know, and she's doing her best job to explain. Again, like she doesn't have the experience of hallucinating, I think, so she's trying to do her best, like to explain, you know, what kind of color she's seeing. It's like movement. It's, you know, she's trying her best. And then, but there's like 3 moments where it kind of stops, the ride, if you want to call it a ride, like just stops and she can kind of see. And I think the first one, we briefly talked about this last time too. I think it's where she says the words like, "I had no idea," or something, or "they're alive." I think she's seeing, no, you know what? I'm sorry. I think the first stop is Vega, right? It's sort
So
of
Vega doesn't seem like it's a habitable place. Nobody thinks
it's like a transit station almost.
yeah,
Isn't it?
but they knew that
Yeah.
going in that was
Yeah.
not a place with habitable.
Yeah.
So they were curious, like, why would it be? This was always the question: why would they live in this place? Why would they live? In
Yeah.
Vega?
Right. So I think she stops and she can kind of see it, but now I'm like, it's escaping me. Like, what does she actually see in that moment?
I think there's like a satellite or something in orbit. Like she's kind of like zipped to another place and she sees something like in orbit around some other kind of, you know, I can't remember, planet or star or something like that. Which I think in the book is, you know, this is a transit station. They're going hub to hub.
Yeah. And then I think the second stop, because then she's back in the wormhole and she's describing it and like really fast and crazy. And the second one I think is the home world of the actual alien species that sent the signal back, sent the Hitler broadcast back to Earth. You know, I think, right? She says it's like a quadruple system. There's like 4 different stars, but she sees like it's in the dark. The planet surface is in the dark, but there's lights. There's some kind of civilization down there. I think that's what she says. Oh, I had no idea they're alive or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's akin to seeing Earth, you know, the dark side of Earth all lit up or something with the, you know, the lights of the people in the cities. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. And then off she goes again to the last stop, which now is this, you know, I am kind of like confused, like that first stop, if it was Vega and the transit station, well, the last stop is not Vega, but is it some other place? It's some other hub, I guess, right? That they always just say this is where we're going to meet up, I guess, right?
I think
But the
so.
point, yeah. So anyway, when the ride stops, it's the movement while she's going through the wormhole is lots of vibrations and shaking, and she's strapped in this seat, and it's shaking quite a bit, and it's really cool because all of a sudden that compass that we were talking about from the Cracker Jack box, she kind of sees it floating up, just kind of floating, like, oh, there's like implying there's no gravity inside this thing, but she's shaking because she's in the seat, and she unstraps herself out of the seat, and then she's floating along with the compass. I think she takes herself out so she can grab the compass, but then the seat is just like shaking like crazy, and until it eventually like dislodges itself from the inside of the sphere. And so I think what I took that to mean was, again, the seat wasn't part of the design. They decided she needed like minimal safety, something at a minimum, some kind of safety thing. So that was the choice they made. But I think the point was like she could have just been sitting there, like Indian style, cross-legged, right? Just like sitting in the pod the whole time, and everything would have been like fine. I don't think she would have been like flung all over the place. Did
Probably
you guys kind of get that?
as it was dropped out of the gantry, you would have gone weightless, just in free fall.
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah. Good point. Yeah.
And it would have
And
been
then
perfect because by the time you get to the center of it, you hit the wormhole, and you're probably literally in the middle of the craft, right? You'd just be
yeah,
floating.
just floating in it. Yeah. That was kind of the impression I got. So as she's realizing, oh yeah, I'm just floating here, but her attention is focused on this compass. So once she grabs it, then she starts looking around, and like this is the
Also,
moment
beautiful
where
symbolism, perhaps like an oh God moment. Like, if you think about symbolically, is not overthinking it, not, trying to engineer your way past this obstacle, but to like see it for what it is, and right, and leap of faith style, just believe that you're right because it looks like you're right.
yeah,
Unbuckle from the safety thing, grasp the the symbolic truth, whatever that thing was, and and let go, have
yeah,
a let go moment.
yeah. Oh, I love it. And in that moment, she's looking, and just the nature of the sphere again, like because she could see the planet, like it's not like there's a windshield, but it's kind of like she can see through it, right? And what she sees is this beautiful spiral kind of galaxy, and she starts crying. She's just like, it's so beautiful. I can't think of the words. And then she says the line that if you've listened to this show, it's the first thing you hear when you listen to this podcast. She says they should have sent a poet. And that's in the movie. The book line is they should be sending up young poets and composers, artists, filmmakers, deeply religious people not wholly enthralled to the sectarian bureaucracies. And then there's another line in the book where this word comes back. The feeling was numinous. And I want to go back to that when she's saying they should have sent a poet, and she's sort of crying. And we talked about it last time too, that there's this CGI-ish thing happening with her face, that it's morphing, and young Ellie's face comes out. You can see young Ellie's face. I wondered if what if that was just a clever way of sort of indicating to the audience like the aliens are reading her history, and in that moment where they were absorbing this experience so that they could show her dad, when they were picking up all this, like the love that she had for her father and everything, in that moment they were getting it. Her face morphed into young Ellie in that moment. Maybe
That's
not,
great.
maybe that's my
No,
own thing, but
No, I do like it because it kind of ties it to that line we talked about in the book where he describes, in a way you sitting here today are not yourself. You are an amalgam of all your past selves.
yeah, Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really really, creative thing. I want to do a time check here. What are we at? Oh, we're getting close to hour and a half. So I wonder if we could find a stopping point, because that we'll just kind of forecast a bit here. The two major things now left in the story are the interaction with the alien, right, and then the return, right? So maybe we could just kind of wrap up here soon with
I
like
think
kind of
that's
final thoughts before the actual interaction.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I think this is the break in the natural break in the story, because those last two components are exactly it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think my thoughts, obviously, the concept specifically of they should have sent a poet, very, very, very
Yeah.
fundamental in, how can I put this? So there is the experience side, right? We've been talking ad nauseum about the contextualized learning, the feeling of the numinous feeling, right? The seeing the photons, the real photons yourself, what it feels
Mhm.
like to have your toes in the sand and smell the air and all that. But here's the thing, you can't share that feeling with anybody.
Yeah.
You can't transmit that feel. Now you can look upon somebody and kind of gauge their experience, and human chemistry, brain chemistry is such that you can kind of feel what they feel a little bit, a vicarious feeling, but it's not the same thing. And where we really want to get to is sharing that feeling in a network way, but you need words.
Yeah.
And using the words, that's the exploration. How do we do it? And it goes back to stories. Like he's teaching you, Sagan's teaching you these values and these concepts, but not by telling you here's a list of things to study. He's telling that, he's narrating, telling the story that has principles in it, and it has characters in it, and it has plot devices, and so anyway, the point is, obviously, he's referencing the power of the words themselves to describe the feeling. So you need the feeling, but it's dead with you. It ends with you, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing
Right.
wrong with you having your own experiences and you living in the moment. I'm a big proponent of that, but then there's sitting down with other people and sharing that experience and
Right.
discussing what it means, and that's a whole nother level, and that's where you get to this emergent property of, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And there's no way as a speaker you would ever have anything near as important to say as when you have a loving, attentive listener, who's desirous of the signal that you're transmitting. It works both ways. You can't just transmit beauty into a void. I don't believe it. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. Like it's created to be shared. That's the moment of, um, feeling, not just, it's the feeling of appreciation for that feeling. It's, if that makes any sense, like
Yeah.
just feeling appreciative of feeling itself. I think that's hard to put into words. So anybody who can put that into words, who is the poet, they are able to multiply that experience, an infinite number of times, because that is the beauty of the words, is that it is pure information. Back to the transporter, you don't have to move the actual thing. You can move the pattern of the thing and then recreate it somewhere else. I mean, there's a power to that. There's a power to
Totally.
sharing information. Obviously, if I have two apples, I give you one. Now we each have one apple. If I have two ideas, I could give you two ideas. Now we each have two ideas. Like, there's no loss. There's something magical about that thing.
Yeah.
And Sagan is at the heart of that thing. That is a great, tension focal point of everything. I believe that concept in and of itself, the dichotomy between the pattern or the information of the thing and experiencing the actual thing subjectively itself.
Yeah. I love it.
There's one more thing about the journey that I think is important, and I don't know that it's necessarily talked about the same way in the book. But at one of the stops, there's almost, and I don't remember if it's like an intermediary one or if it's the final one, but there's like a space station almost. And the space station, the whole exterior is covered with those pods, like Ellie's in.
I
And
forgot about that.
it's basically like putting the idea out there that there are thousands of those machines that have been built by other civilizations. There has
Yeah.
to be, because otherwise there would be no need for that space station to be covered with that many pods. Like, so it's
It's a
like,
process. It's a
yeah,
process that's ongoing that we're a part of now. I think that's a beautiful point. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
touching on the dream portion, or the decoding of everybody's memories. If you guys recall, with the 5 pilots or the 5 passengers, each one would recount their own unique subjective, you know, interaction with the aliens, all
Right.
constructed by their own personal histories, right? And like everybody had a loved one except for that one guy. I think he had a Chinese.
Yeah.
You know,
The emperor or whatever he was just
thank you.
fascinated with. He just wanted to know how this guy, did what he did or whatever. Yeah, it's just
And
hyperfixation even.
yeah, but each person, right, having their own thoughts and dreams and experiences downloaded somehow against their will, or without their consent, or whatever you want to call it. And that process took place, I believe. Am I right? So when they got to that big hub station where everybody was docking in, I think they fell asleep, right? They all kind of like that
yeah,
was. I think that was the
Mm,
moment. And then they all woke up on their own beach, so to speak, and they all had their own subjective experience. So I think that's a very magical part of the story, where
yeah.
you are you get a glance of some bigger story that you don't even get to taste. And it's such a delicious thing, right? This concept of, this isn't just magic for humans. This is going on a million different worlds, a million different places, all simultaneously, because the universe is so big and beautiful and amazing. I think it's inspiring.
Totally. Yeah. To go back to the poet piece and the sharing stuff, dude. It's like I like how you said, Bob, that once you have that experience, kind of dies with you. You can't share it. Just to borrow a line from Tenet, it's not an excuse not to try. you know and I
Exactly.
think that's why it's so important, because I think that's where we are as a species. Like you said, we don't. What I'm getting at is like, let's just maybe make some predictions of the future, that Ray Kurzweil is able to put his consciousness into digital format, and not just him but anybody, right? To me, like, it seems inevitable that there's a point where we would be able to sort of codify our feelings. This is like something that I'd like to dig into in a different episode, but so for now I'll just kind of try to keep it brief. But we don't really have that. All we have right now is words to describe. Like, so one day maybe it will be much simpler. Maybe it will be easy to just point at you know some code and say, this is what my happiness looks like. Oh, your happiness looks like this. You can see the subtle differences there, and it's very objective. But we're not there yet. We only have our words, to share these things. Like, it's so important to me that we keep doing this, that we keep trying, even though, to your point, like, the experience happens once and it can't be recreated and it can't be shared. So it's very fascinating to me to kind of
Well,
really wrap my head around
that's the
that.
genius of the poet, John. That's why it's such a difficult job. To be a poet is probably, I mean, it is the great divide between the experience itself and talking about the experience, right? It's such a hard thing to do. I think it is. And it brings me back to a thought real quick on, at least I tried, like this human component of never giving up. At least I tried. It makes
Mm.
me think of, I don't know if you guys watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
The point where the main character McMurphy is saying, I bet I could throw this, essentially this giant tub sink thing, this giant, metal stone plumbing fixtures for hundreds of pounds. He's like, I bet I could pick this up and throw it out through this window. We all escape right now. And I bet you I can. And everybody's like, no, you can't. I bet you I can. Okay, well, put your fucking money down. I bet you I can do this thing. And they all put their money down, and everybody's cheering and going crazy wild. And he gets up and he grabs this, and there's no way in hell he can do this thing. And he's trying, he's struggling. He finally gives up, and everybody's real quiet. And as he's walking out, he turns back. At least I tried.
Yeah.
At least I tried. This is the point. Humans, the thing that we have is at least we try against insurmountable odds, impossible things. We believe this thing, and sometimes the beauty is sometimes your belief is not enough, but you will never find out if you don't believe first, and that's the great tension. Like belief is not, the faith is not real unless it is. I don't know how else to explain that. Like your love for your dad, Ellie, right, is not real unless it is, and it is to her, so it is real. Now to you it might not be. No,
Right.
the belief that you could do this thing is the only gateway that allows you to actually do it. I think we all agree. If you don't believe you can do this thing, there's no way you could possibly do it. Now, it doesn't mean your belief is the thing that makes you able to do it. Technically, right? You need the strength. So back to the movie, the chief ends up lifting this thing at the end and throwing it through the window. Okay. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the chief goes in, picks this thing up, and throws it through the window because he's a big, bad motherfucker. He's just the biggest, baddest motherfucker there is. But it is true. You could do it. Okay. It is true. It could be done. Now, McMurphy didn't do it, but the chief watching McMurphy gave him the idea to do it.
Yeah.
And at the end, that is what really caused the chief to pick this thing up and throw it through, is because this other guy believed he could do it.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff.
Before we go for next week, I want us all to think about if you were the one on the machine, who do you meet on the other side?
Nice.
I love it. Yeah, so write that down so we don't forget. Yeah.
That's
and
wonderful.
to clarify, actually won't be next week because Tobo Tucker and I have things going on next weekend. But dear listener, who hopefully is just so enthralled with our conversations here, well, we've this kind of works out. We had actually done like 9 episodes on this other platform called Callin, which was very convenient. It was all through the phone, but it wasn't very shareable. But we have these sort of lost episodes, and so next week will be one of those episodes, and then we'll pick up on part 5 of Contact the following week. And
and whoever was
I'm gonna write that
betting,
down. Who would
by the way,
see?
the over under was 4.5. Just so
It was, yeah.
So if you took the over, you won.
You won.
There you go.
Yeah. And
But I like that starting point of picking up with who would you meet. I think that's next level. Everybody should have that.
Yeah.
That's my point. Everybody should have that. It should be like the Rorschach test of when you meet somebody, would be like, oh, by the way, which Beatle are you, right? Or are you a Rolling Stones guy? Are you an Elvis guy or whatever, like this kind of thing?
Which Hogwarts house are you in?
Totally, exactly. Yeah. Which Hogwarts house? Dude, it should totally be, hey, dude, so who did you meet on the beach, right? Right, when the aliens took you out. I think that's a great manifestation of.
And I'll take this even farther to give, because I think the who do you meet on the other side, I think that's going to be a fairly simple question for people. But part 2 of that question is, what is the beach? What is your beach?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thank you.
Remind me, is it true or not true? They all, because I think John had an explanation for why she's on the beach. Is the beach she drew as a child. I love that.
Pensacola, yeah.
Yep.
Is Pensacola. Everybody did in the book. Did everybody else? Because obviously in the movie there were no other pilots or passengers. Did everybody have their own location? I want to say they did, right? They all woke up.
I thought that they all woke up on a beach, and then they all walked through a door on the beach.
And Ellie did not. Like everyone else was sort of just drawn into these. They just started walking, and then they went through doors, like Tucker said. And for whatever reason, Ellie wasn't drawn anywhere. She was right where she needed to be, and then the alien came to her.
Yeah, that's power right there. Yeah, let's pick up right there. That's such a Such a
'Cause
powerful.
Yeah.
I think it touches on what we talked about. I think it was last episode where, your ideal summer day didn't really exist, but that's your mental image
Yeah.
of the ideal day. So what's your
Your
beach?
composite. Yeah, your
Yes,
composite
exactly.
of your best day ever.
Yep. Best
So we
day
have to. So
ever.
we pick our composite best day ever, and our composite. Who would we be talking to? I love that.
Yeah. Excellent. So look forward to that. Yeah, again, sendingpoets@gmail.com if you want to get a hold of us. So thank you guys. Awesome conversation as usual. Looking forward to the next one. I'll keep saying this until we think of another closing tagline, but in the words of John Quincy Adams, you're never alone as long as you have a poet in your pocket.